The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
I explore this thought through this concept of the beholder's share, this idea that God is both artist and he is both audience. And so in that interaction between us and everything that we do in our lives, like he is ultimately the one that assigns value and worth to all we are and all we do, whatever it is that we're doing, however we're working, whatever we're making. As we do those things, we can do them knowing that he has his gaze on us.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Rachel Marie Kang is the author of Let There Be Art, The Pleasure and Purpose of Unleashing the Creativity Within You. In this episode, Rachel and I discuss creative collisions, finding balance between art making and other life responsibilities, and creating right where you are. Rachel Marie Kang, I'm so glad to have you on the Habit Podcast today. Thanks for making time for me.
Thank you, Jonathan.
So you're new-ish. I mean, I guess it's now been out a couple of weeks, but your new book is Let There Be Art. And so, one of the themes that recurs in this book is the idea that creativity grows out of a person's life, right? It's not this thing that comes from outside necessarily. I mean, in some sense it does come from outside, but your particular kind of creativity grows out of your life. So I'd like to hear about your life and what led you to do creative work and just as importantly, to cultivate creativity in other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I always joke around and say, what came first, the chicken or the egg? I don't know if there was the passion to write first or this, inkling of a curiosity, or if I just simply picked up the pen and pad and started writing my poems and my thoughts. I have no idea. But what I do know is that that's how it started. It started out with a journal and a pen, writing poems, writing my thoughts down. And then there was this evolution of, okay, now I'm taking these poems and I'm turning them into songs. And now I'm finding that I really enjoy writing essays in school and now in college. And so just this progression, that kind of kept unfolding until in college, I realized I didn't just have this thing that I turned to and felt natural, but I realized, hey, there's a passion here. How about I turn this into a pursuit? And so I went from having one major in college to then being undeclared to finally taking up creative writing. And, that season of undergraduate studies and then a few years after that, it was more so still just cultivating that passion, this craft that I love so much. And it wasn't until a few years later where I realized, hey, this thing that I love, I can actually use it as a way to welcome others, a way to serve others. And so at that point, maybe 2016, really, I felt this shift in my life towards, this thing that was just this personal pursuit, this pleasure, to then using it to connect with others and eventually help them cultivate their own creativity.
Yeah. You glad you majored in creative writing?
I do not regret that for 1 minute.
Really? Yeah.
And, there was a time in college, I remember that first day showing up to my would-be advisor's office, and there were towers of books everywhere. And it was just so quintessential. And there was just a fraction of a second where I said, is this the right thing? And then after I got into conversation with, who he eventually did become my advisor, I was like, no, this is the way to go. This is it. Yeah.
I sometimes people ask me about creative writing program. I just know very little about creative writing programs, and never quite know what to tell them, whether it's a good idea to develop, to do that as a writer, to major in that, or, the class that I think had the biggest influence on me as a writer. I mean, of course, literature classes, but because I majored in English and in literature. But besides that, my geology class just blew my mind and made me want to go write some stuff. Just to see the way that sort of hidden forces make their mark on the world. Just felt like this is, geology is just metaphor at work,
Yeah. That is so interesting.
So Flannery O'Connor
really
kind of said to do she also, Flannery O'Connor got an MFA, so she let me room to talk about creative writing, but she emphasized take whatever classes or do whatever makes you better at looking and seeing and paying attention.
Yes.
And whether that's drawing or whether that's reading about rocks or whatever.
Yes. And it's so key, I think, to just be able to learn from people that are different from you. Like when I look back at my those undergraduate years, and I really can't tell more than 10 major lessons that I've learned, right? About life, through those classes, which were taught by professors that had totally different outlooks than I did. And, and so I do frequently share, people are like, what are things that you took away from those years? And I'm like, well, in writing theory, I might not have written any amazing essays or anything, but I learned through that writing journal that we had to hand in each week from one of my professors, that I needed a better worldview because every entry was me, I. Yeah. And so I remember that first marked down grade that I got in this journal that was for me, for my own creative writing. And he said, why don't you look around you? Write about the trees, write about what's happening, not just in your inner world, but your outer world. Kind of like what you're saying, these things that help us to see more. Yeah. So,
I love that. I love that so much. The idea that the writer's work is to look. I mean, of course, there's going to be some inwardness involved. If you don't have any inner life, you're not going to be much of a writer. But I love, as I help other writers, I like talking about looking out and giving an account of what you've seen on the outside, not just on the inside. So that's so good. So you talk about the idea. Somewhere I saw that you see this book as an invitation to people to create right where they are. And I'd love to hear more about that. So I think this book sort of began to take shape as you were, had a newborn baby and were dealing with some health issues, maybe, if I remember correctly. And it had to come out. That's the only place it could come out of because that's where you were, right?
Right.
So tell me about that, this idea of inviting people to create right where they are.
Yeah, I think about this book and just like you said, the situations that I wrote from and really had no choice but to write from. Um, and I also think back to my beginning too, that young girl that picked up a journal and just, is writing. And even then, writing was available to me, right? I probably had stashes of paper. I probably had journals that my parents had gifted me and pens in the house. And so even then I was already using what was already there, available to me. And so much of that is very true of this book. And what my hope is to invite people into is, we think that when we're picking up a pleasure or a passion, we have to go out and get the most expensive tools, that we have to have the most of time. And really there's just this subtle invitation to begin right where you are. And so, yeah, a little bit about, my life as I was writing this book. I, was pregnant at first when I got signed to write this book. We're in the middle of a pandemic, can't really go anywhere, can't really do anything. And then as the months were just, unfolding, I was actually walking through a health journey in which, for a very long time, there was no diagnosis. And so, yeah, there were days where I couldn't bring myself to give 100%, maybe my body was tired or weak. And even just thinking about, resources, like I wanted to get so many books. I wanted to do so much research for this book. And yet there was so little time. There was really not, this is like beginning stages of 2020 where we're all still like, where is this going? This pandemic, what is life going to be like in the next 6 months, a year from now? And so all of that is kind of halted, and I've told people, I've said, I actually am so thankful that I got to write this particular book in this time of my life. I've been pursuing this for 10 years, right? I've been on this journey for 10 years, and it just so happened that in the last 2, I got to write this book when I had the most limitations on my life. And so as much as I extend that invitation and as much as I, give prompts and prayers and poems and reflective research in this book, what I'm also offering is my own testimony and my own experience of like, here's this book. It is not the most perfect book, but just like I am telling you that in your lack, in your limitations, in your strain for time and resources and even inspiration, that you too can possibly make something, and I hope that speaks to people.
Yeah. I think it spoke to me. You mentioned an old Latin motto that I'd never seen before, libri aut liberi, books or children. The idea that you can either make books or you can raise kids, but it's really not feasible to do both. And you take issue with that Latin motto.
I do.
Tell me about that.
I think, well, first I have to say, I also myself have never encountered this thought before. And I studied very briefly and not extensively, but I did study Latin in college for 2 years. And so I think like when I came across this, I was like, what? But it makes so much sense. And so I will say, I was introduced to this idea in a book, Creativity by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He is, they call him the father of flow. So this thought it kind of arrested me because I thought, oh my gosh, we are not living in ancient Rome. We have evolved since, but there is still this lingering conception or thought that this is true, that we can only spend our lives raising children or cultivate growing a career, that it's this one or other thing, and which is understandable because both are so demanding, right? If you're cultivating a community, a church, if you're trying to cultivate a career, you're trying to cultivate your creativity, to do that alongside of investing yourself in a family, however that looks. Really, if that's children or just a spouse, or however that looks, that it's impossible. And again, I think it goes back to what I was just saying before, is that we have these limitations on us. And there is a very real reality that all of us, we live with lack. And that ebbs and flows through seasons. Sometimes it's resources, sometimes it's time, sometimes it's inspiration, sometimes it's your physical strength, your endurance, your stamina, your health. And so I sought to dismantle that right in the introduction of my book, and take this, huge thing and tackle this giant with, some stone and to say, perhaps it's not about escaping one or the other. Perhaps it is about this chaotic collision and seeing what we can make with our hands, but also what we can make of ourselves in the midst of, these things existing together. Yeah.
Movies about writers give the impression that the way you write is you sit at a desk and you look out over the ocean. Somebody somewhere said, if you from the movies, you would think writing was a form of interior decorating. The writer goes off to the cabin or to the beach house or the whatever, and that's good work if you can get it. But the truth is, most of the people I know who are doing creative work and also taking care of small people, and usually they have some other job. There are so many ways. There's so many distractions. Well, let me just say, I'm not sure, how do you even write if you don't have a full life that's creating inputs? It's as if in the movies, writing looks like something that just comes out from inside your brain and comes out. And as you know, from living and writing, things are coming in, and that's where they create, so much of the raw material for creativity.
Absolutely. Just like you were saying before, there's a lot to say about that outward looking, and some of that comes in the form of the people that we're bumping into day in and day out, and the conflicts that we have with them, and the resolutions, and all of that. It comes from that. And another thing that's explored in this book, Creativity by Csikszentmihalyi, that really has changed the way I think about how I approach my creativity, is that creativity is so seasonal and circular and cyclical. Like, it's not linear in the way that we would think it is. And so you might have that blocked out time where you sit down at your desk and everything is clear and you have a beautiful view in front of you. And maybe you don't have ideas come to you, right? And so you can do everything in your power to make that quintessential experience of being a writer or a creative or a maker, right? But it's actually in the living and in the loving and the losing where, you're getting those stories, those ideas, those themes that inspire the work that you want to explore and maybe eventually do create.
Yeah. Let's talk about mothers and art and creativity. I think it's so important for moms to model creativity in all its forms to their children. And I think it's dangerous for a child's development for the mother to give the impression that she exists for the purpose of serving those, only for the purpose of serving those. Obviously, serving children is a big part of what parents do. But to model for children that, one way we image the image of God is by making stuff
Yeah.
and not just cleaning up after kids, which again, I'm not in any way discounting the importance of taking care of kids. But also sometimes letting kids clean up their own dishes is something that's good for them too.
Yeah.
I don't know how old your kids are. Maybe they're not ready for that yet, but.
Oh yeah. No, I have a 4-year-old and an almost 2-year-old.
Oh yeah, they should be washing their own dishes.
Yeah, that almost 2-year-old, we're having some fun there. But yeah, just like you're saying, I have a 4-year-old and, such an inquisitive age, so observational, and deep and intricate. And, 4-year-olds are so daunting almost because they have these deep and heavy and weighty feelings and thoughts. And there's so much information right now. And you're so right. Like, it means so much to me for my kid, for my son to see the thing that I am making and why it matters to me. In addition to what I am doing at home, right? Yeah, I think that it is a message that always needs to be said and heard, that women can create. And I'm not even just talking about art right now. There are so many women that are building businesses.
Absolutely.
There are so many women that maybe it's not generating income, but they are building volunteer-based communities or initiatives and projects, or maybe there is a little bit of art, there's baking, or there's, so many people stepping into painting now and being their own artists. And there's just, you could never say too much that, yes, you can do this. Even as you are mothering, even as you are, cultivating friendships, you're a daughter, you were juggling all these things. And I want to say the same is for men too.
Sure.
I wrote in one of my chapters on play, which is turning out to be a big chapter. I just thought, I think I want to write about play, and I'm hearing such great things. I think adults really want to hear that permission, that not everything has to be about usefulness, that there can be just this, play to do things for pleasure. And that is totally my husband. I mean, he will come and play on his guitar for hours and teach himself new scales. And, sometimes I'll ask, like, what are you practicing for? And it's for nothing. It's just for play, or his fishing. That's the new thing these days is, and so there's so much to play with, all these gadgets and tools and things to learn. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, the whole idea of the Sabbath is, not the whole idea, but a big part of the idea of the Sabbath is if you stop working, the world is not going to collapse.
Right.
And the Sabbath is a model of where we're headed. And where we're headed is not that we're going to be useful; it's that we're going to be loved. And well, good. You're right. I mean, these things are just as true for men as for women. I think it's for whatever reason, it's harder for women to believe it. I think that their creative work is important, and is something that's worth even letting the kids go and play Legos by themselves for a little while, so that mom can go make something.
Yeah.
And so thank you for voicing that for the women who are in your world.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's a lot of internal and maybe just like innate fear, insecurity. There's also, and this is something that I didn't go into so much into my book because honestly, it would be a book in of itself, but there is a whole history behind why that could even be a thing for women. This idea of being able to do something for pleasure, right? Historically, we know like women bound to kitchens, right? Cooking meals, the caretakers of the house. And so there really is also a history to this and almost this inherited like, well, but this is how it is. And this is how it has to be. So we are up against so much. And I do think there are some good chapters in here that kind push against that and give that permission.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. So another recurring theme in your book is the idea that that we have this habit of questioning whether our work has worth. So how can you know that creative work is worth what it costs? Because it does cost something, right?
Yeah.
Doing creative work, it's costly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that there are so many degrees as to why we create and how we can know that it's worthwhile, right? And so I think that it helps to put it back into perspective that you can create for yourself, right? Like you can create for the sake of exhale. You can create, you can make things, you can write, you can journal. You can fictionalize stories in your head. You can bake, you can do all of these things for the sake of release, right? And so in terms of that, what is the value of that? What is the what worth does that carry? Well, it's the state of your soul. And how are you doing and how are you feeling? And is this medium, whichever one you've chosen for whatever particular season, is it helping you experience exhale and peace and release? And then I do think that there is this other side to where, okay, now I want to take this thing that I love, kind of like in my own story, and I want to contribute something to society, to the people that I am in direct communication and community with. I want to do something with this. And so maybe that passion or that pursuit becomes public and you begin writing books, or you are sharing poems on Instagram, or you are taking these sketches that always remained in your journal and now you are selling them, and now you're painting on canvas, right? And so I think that, I kind of talk about in my first chapter with this, and using the spine of like Madeleine L'Engle and what she says in terms of like what is good art, right? And really anything that is redemptive, that explores these themes of redemption, that helps to bring calm where there is chaos, like that is good art, right? That is good. And so if we are taking these things and contributing them to the people that are around us, the societies, the groups, the churches, the online communities that we serve, and we are helping to instill or cultivate within others that same thing that we have experienced, may it be peace or exhale or order where there has been chaos, then that is good. And maybe that doesn't always look, that's not always reflected in book sales. Maybe that's not always reflected in, you're not on that bestseller list. Maybe the business isn't bringing in as much money as you had hoped, or that would sustain you. But
you say maybe, we need to say probably.
Probably, right. Yeah. Like, let's be honest, right? And so, lots of questions come from that. But are you helping people? Truly, are you helping people? Is the art, this thing that you are making, is it helping people? Are you hearing from people that this is bringing them to healing, that it is bringing them closer to the people that they love? It's bringing them closer to God, and that kind of brings me back to just a final point, is that worth, and I talk about this in the third chapter of my book, but like ultimately we really do have an audience of one. And I explore this thought through this concept of the beholder's share, this idea that God is both artist and he is both audience. And so in that interaction between us and everything that we do in our lives, like he is ultimately the one that assigns value and worth to all we are and all we do. And so at the end of the day, whatever it is that we're doing, however we're working, whatever we're making, as we do those things, we can do them knowing that he has his gaze on us, and that through that interaction, like, he is calling us good. He sees us as his sons and daughters. He is bestowing his love on us. And in that is so much worth and value for our lives, you know?
Yeah. And when you say God is both the artist and the beholder, that's us too, right? We're always beholding and always making. Hopefully we're always making.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's really that interplay between the creation of the making of things and the receiving of things. It goes in all directions at all times, you know.
Yeah.
And if you're not receiving, you got nothing to make. And that's also good. And I love the point you make about bringing order where there was chaos, because even if we're defining it in terms of did it help somebody, it's easy for me to either downplay that this is really, you know, things I make are really good for people, or sometimes nobody does see, right? You really do put something out in the world and it feels like nobody paid any attention to it.
Yeah.
But if you are making order, some sort of order where there was chaos, that's good work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Even if it's just for you. Even if it's just for you.
Yeah. You point out that the human story doesn't start with the fall, right? It doesn't start when we started sinning and, you know, getting it wrong. The story starts with creation, and over which God said, this is good, this is good, this is very good. How does that truth shape the way we think about work?
Yeah, absolutely. I like to read just that portion because I've been hearing a lot about, you know, in particular, this one line. But yeah, this is in the first chapter where I say, you know, when faced with the choice of light and life and light, or death and disunion with God, she, Eve, and Adam stand there, two bodies, bare and unbelieving. They forsake faith and they bite into the fruit. They fall with the fate of every human heart on their fingers. They didn't just break a set of rules. They broke their hearts open to Satan's unbounded way of being. They broke their hearts wide open to a way of life that pushes back the light and love of God instead of pushing back the dark with God. Brokenness wasn't our beginning. We began as breath bound to the heartbeat of God. We were not damned from the beginning. Darkness was. We were not bad and broken from the beginning. We were believed in from the beginning. We began not prone to wander, but prone to worship. I really thought to myself, if I'm going to write a book on creativity, then I have to start with the creation story, just like everyone else.
Yeah, right.
But how can I do it in a way that I'm not hinging on the part of the story where it's always about the shame, right? Because I think we've all heard that story.
Yeah.
A lot. We've heard it enough, I think. I've heard it enough, you know? And while that will never go away and we can never wash that part from our origin away, there's something to focusing on the fact that when we started, we were good. All was good. And so I think I just try to highlight that a little bit. Maybe hinge my focus on that part a little bit. And I do think that it shifts our perspective and knowing, you know, that we are not, you know, there's this feeling or this thought that we have to continually be good, that we have to fix things ourselves, you know, kind of like going back to the garden and, you know, Eve is just they're sewing up these clothes made of leaves, and it's like we have to fix it, right? We have to cover it up. And I don't think that's the invitation there, right? There's an invitation to confess. There's an invitation to say, here I am in my sin and what I've done. And I think that as we do that, here's how we do that. We can do that in our in our lives and in our loving. We can do that in the work that we do. We can do that in the things that we make, whether they are churches, businesses, companies, whether this is paintings, dances, spoken word, all these different video games, movies, all of these different things in which we are allowing ourselves to confess the state of our souls. And in that kind of confess that we need something bigger than ourselves, who ultimately that is Jesus. That's, the Lord. And I think in that, find that this is another thing I say, is like art as a way of climbing towards the light. Like we're not trying to fix things. We know that we cannot do that. But we are climbing towards the light, towards the truth, towards God, towards his love, towards one another, inch by inch, story by story, painting by painting, poem by poem. Perhaps we are just confessing and climbing our way through,
Yeah. Now, how is that idea that art is climbing toward the light? How's that different from, say, I'm going to behave myself and somehow justify my existence by being good and by, I guess, how's this different from a kind of works righteousness?
Yeah, I think so much of art is there's a level of question in art, right? And there's a level of curiosity, and there's a level of maybe not all art, but most art aims to be honest in the fact of like, I'm trying to figure this out. I'm trying to explore what I think, or reflect what I know, that which I know at this time, and so I think that there is something, again, so honest about that. And
it's kind of a question of putting up signposts, not arriving, but saying, here, reader, listener, viewer, look in this direction, and that points us toward.
Like here I am. Yeah.
Okay. So work out an apparent contradiction here for me, okay? You just got through talking about that. Our story starts with good, that God created and declared it good. You also say that art rises up from that which is broken and imperfect and unseen and unsure. How do those two notions, on the one hand, I pay attention to the fact that that creation is good. On the other hand, art's always growing up out of the brokenness and imperfection.
Yeah. Well, so, inputting into that equation, we do recognize that there is brokenness in the world, and that is from the fall, that is from sin entering this world. And this idea of, taking that which is broken, taking that which is maybe even hurt, in pain, unsure and unseen, and cultivating from that, I think, a sense of hope, a sense of hope and wanting to, as I said before, like climb towards the light, climb towards healing, climb towards hope. It's a reaching. It's, again, this idea of confession. And so I think that goes back to, again, to, you know, this idea of being able to create where you're from and starting where you're from. And there are so many of us that maybe we are in a season where there is brokenness, right?
Mhm.
And we find it hard to believe there, you know, where is the goodness of my story and of this world? Where is that? And so perhaps the hope is that, you know, in starting where you are and starting in that darkness, using art as a way to climb towards the light through that. Yeah. And I think that there's something so, I think this is what I aimed to capture when I share just about, you know, I quote Jeffrey Leonard from his book, Creation Rediscovered, where he talks about the creation story, but from the ancient perspective, right? And really just enriches what you might think you know about Genesis. And so, but this idea of tikkun olam, and this idea that when God created the world, right, that he created light, he called light into being, saying, "Let there be light," right? That he creates this boundary of light that pushes back the darkness, but doesn't completely banish it, right? There's still this existence of darkness. And so this Judaic concept, there's this idea of like, yeah, in that God is almost surely, like, I'm just saying almost surely, but it's like he's demonstrating this act that potentially we are invited into, that we to ourselves, we might not be able to banish all that is bad in our lives and in this world, but we surely can attempt to push it back. That with the light, with goodness, you know, that we can attempt to push it back. And so, yeah, the whole premise, the whole thought of this book is that perhaps art is a way of doing that. Perhaps creation, the act of creation, just as God is creating, and he pushes back that darkness. Perhaps that invitation is for us too, you know? And so I don't think that the brokenness and the whatever is bad in our lives and ultimately in this world, it's not going to be fully gone in this time, you know, but to think that we are invited in pushing that back, you know, and there's something there that is intriguing and almost empowering.
Yeah, pushing back darkness, creating order where there's chaos, and that's another principle of creation. So good. Wow. All right, we're running out of time here. So, but before we go, I want you to hear your answer to my traditional last question, which is, who are the writers who make you want to write?
Okay, I always love this question, and my answers are always unexpected. So I'll give the two that were really formative in my younger years, and then I'll give a few that are current.
Right.
But Dr. Seuss and Shakespeare. Lots of repetition in my writing, and a lot of that was picked up from Dr. Seuss. And there's a deeper story there. I have a brother with special needs, and so, you know, Dr. Seuss has a huge role in the life of my family. And then Shakespeare, Hamlet, the idea of not saying really what you want to say, Ophelia and Hamlet too, and just being so just bound by his, you know, the circumstances of his story. So I just like fell in love with that, and both of them are huge inspirations. Modern these days, Joan Didion, love her prose. And Voskamp, again, just this poetic, lyrical way of writing prose. And someone that I'm just falling in love with currently is Maya Angelou. So yeah, those are a few.
Another person with North Carolina connections, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Rachel Marie Kang, thank you so much for being here. I love your book and hope a lot of people read and benefit from it. So thanks for being here.
It's good to be here. Thank you, Jonathan.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.